you just practice this set of 3 principles, if you embrace this secret of life, if you follow these 5 steps to self-improvement, if you do this or you do that, your life will be rich and it will be full. You'll get your act together. Plan it out, budget your time, and optimize your life. On the surface, all of this sounds pretty satisfying, a way to have a grand life of purpose. If we can put measurable steps in place to accomplish our big dreams, we can have everything we want. Or at least that's the promise. See, self-help culture and self-help industry has ballooned over the last 20 years. It's become a pretty big phenomenon in our way of doing life. According to market research, the self-help improvement market was worth $9.9 billion in 2016. And by the year 2022, it's supposed to grow to $13.2 billion. That's an average of 5.6 yearly gains. That's crazy. The self-help industry is full of books and practices, programs, motivational speakers, classes, even apps. Apple identified SelfHelp Care as the app trend of 2018 with all kinds of different apps, things like Fabulous, Shine, Calm. There's even an app called 10% Happier, whatever that means. And this isn't just a North American phenomenon. It's something that's growing all around the world. According to figures from the Nielsen book research, in the UK, the self-improvement literature has seen an increase in sales of up to 20%. In India, the self-help publishing industry has grown exponentially over the last 14 years. Self-help culture in modern society is growing everywhere. If you break down the consumer stats, it gets even more interesting. Millennials are driving the growth of self-improvement industry, with 94% of millennials reporting that making personal improvement commitments, and they said they'd be willing to spend nearly $300 a month on self-improvement. Millennials spend twice as much as baby boomers on self-improvement with things like working out and life coaching and well-being apps. According to market research, women make up 70% of the overall consumer market when it comes to self-improvement or self-care. I mean, some of the stats are just staggering with how much we're just kind of buying in and diving into this idea of self-help culture. So there's no denying that self-help and self-improvement is increasingly becoming a big part of the way we do life in modern society. And because of this, we have to kind of ask ourselves some pretty good questions. Things like, what's the goal of self-help? What's the point of it? Is constantly trying to improve myself, is that really good for me? Is there a balanced approach within all of this? And probably one of the most important questions, are there things we should definitely avoid within this whole self-help culture? Well, if you want to start answering those questions, I think it's probably a pretty good place to start with what the Bible says, what the Scripture says about self-care, and what Jesus says about self-care. Now, the Bible doesn't directly address self-care as an issue, but it does help us understand that taking care of ourselves both physically and mentally are very good things. Since the time of Moses in the Old Testament, God has provided guidance for caring for ourselves, for our minds and our bodies. Just look at Exodus 34:21. 6 days you shall labor, but on the 7th day you shall rest. Even during the plowing season and harvest, you must rest. See, God values and commands rest. We saw that there. You can see it in Hebrews 4 as well, and other places. God cares for our physical bodies. He wants us to care for our physical bodies. Jesus himself prioritized rest. When faced with great crowds, Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed, it says in Luke 5:16. We can also see in Mark 6:30 through 32 him direct his disciples this way. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. See, we can see that Jesus cared for his disciples, and he cared that they didn't get to eat, and he instructed them to get some rest. Now, we know that if you follow the story, that doesn't necessarily quite work out for them because this huge crowd follows and this great story unfolds, but you can still see the heart of Jesus. He cared for his disciples. He wanted to take care of them. He wanted them to intentionally take care of themselves as well. Time and time again, we see that Jesus knew we needed to be intentional about taking care of our physical and mental health. Self-help in the form of self-care. And I think when we talk about the good of self-help, self-care is a really kind of a better way of describing it. Self-help in the form of self-care is a good thing when done with healthy practices. But there is a very troubling side to the whole idea of self-help and self-help culture. And namely, it causes us to focus on number one. I mean, the first kind of troubling issue is it just causes us to focus, on ourselves a bit too much. And if there's anything we can explicitly walk away with from the teachings of the scriptures and from Jesus himself, it's that when we focus on ourselves, it doesn't go well for us. We usually get ourselves into a lot of trouble. And maybe not temporarily, some things might work out here and there, but ultimately, in the long run, we always get ourselves in trouble. As a Christian, the concept of self-improvement for just self-improvement goes against kind of these two greatest commandments. So if you're somebody that follows the teachings of Jesus or the Bible, there's these two great commandments that we have to follow, and they kind of go directly against this idea of just self-improvement for just self-improvement or just looking out for the self. Matthew 22, 36 through 40 says this, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." See, God is supposed to be number one, and others kind of right after that. God even uses this concept of how you are to love yourself to show how you're supposed to be loving other people. As Christians, we are supposed to be modeling ourselves after Jesus. And Jesus even said himself, he came to serve, not to be served. See, if you follow Jesus, this is what you're supposed to be marked by. It's what you're supposed to be known for. And if you're watching this and you aren't sure where you stand with Jesus, or you wouldn't call yourself a Jesus follower, this is how you should be able to judge Christians. This is how you should be able to look out for other people who say they're Jesus followers. If they are really about what they say they're about, if they love God with all their heart, soul, and mind, maybe you don't believe in God or agree with the concept of God, but you know that these people who say they believe in God, who say they follow Jesus, that they're sold out for what they say they believe in, because you can see they love God with their mind, their soul, their heart. And then you can also see that they love God because they're loving other people. And one of the ways they love other people is that they tell people about Jesus. This is what Christians are supposed to be marked by. And if you know Christians who aren't marked by that, I apologize. It's what we're supposed to be known for. Loving God first and loving other people and telling people about him. This is how you should know people are Christians, that are Jesus followers. So when self-help, self-care, self-improvement becomes all about self, when we aren't checking our goals and our motives, when we aren't kind of figuring out, what's the actual goal of this, what's the motive behind this, it can become pretty dangerous. It leads down paths that ironically can become anti-help. And we can jump into trends and buy into concepts without even really thinking through them. And if we actually stopped and took a step back, they might not even make sense. So listen to this quote from an article titled "Improving Ourselves to Death." It kind of says a lot. In a consumeristic society, we are not meant to buy one pair of jeans and then be satisfied. And the same, they think, is true of self-improvement. We are being sold on the need to upgrade all parts of ourselves all at once, including parts that we did not previously know needed upgrading. The desire to achieve and to demonstrate perfection is not simply stressful, it can also be fatal. According to the British journalist Will Storr, his forthcoming book, Selfie, How We Became Self-Obsessed and What It's Doing to Us, opens alarmingly with a chapter on suicide. Storr is disturbed by the prevalence of suicide in the United States and Britain and blames the horror and the shame of failing to meet the sky-high expectations we set for ourselves. He cites surveys that show that adolescent girls are increasingly unhappy with their bodies and that a growing number of men are suffering from muscle dysmorphia. He interviews psychologists and professors who describe an epidemic of crippling anxiety among university students who are yoked to the phenomenon of perfectionist presentation. Perfectionist presentation. The tendency, especially on social media, to make life look like a string of inviolable triumphs. See, Storr confesses that he too is dogged by self-loathing and suicidal thoughts. We're living in an age of perfectionism, and perfection is the idea that kills. And catch this last saying. He writes, people are suffering and dying under the torture of the fantasy self they're failing to become. Self-help culture in today's society we can get some good stuff out of it, but self-help culture can hurt. It can do damage. So over the course of this series, we're going to look at a bunch of concepts that come out of this self-help movement. And sometimes we're going to look at some of the truths that are wrapped within some of these maybe warped concepts, and we're going to redeem the good and see what we can use out of it. Sometimes we're going to look at concepts and we're going to say, hey, we have to kind of just throw those things out altogether. And here's a better way to live. This morning we're going to look at one of those mantras, but real quick. But before we kind of get into one specific one, I want to give you 3 quick lenses to kind of look at self-help culture. So when you're kind of looking at the whole culture as a whole and you're dealing with things, you can apply these 3 lenses and kind of see what works, what doesn't, what's good, what's bad. And the first one is this, and we've kind of already talked about it. It's that it focuses on self. That's the first lens. That's kind of obvious, but sometimes we approach these things and just kind of jump into them, but it focuses on self. We have already talked a lot about why that's problematic, and especially from the Christian perspective. So we're not really going to kind of spend a lot of time on it, but just know that that should be a lens. And sometimes, if you're honest, we kind of just jump into things without even thinking through that kind of first obvious lens. The second is this: it buys into the myth of control. There should be a lens that we see, that a lot of times these things buy into the myth of control. We're not really in control. Yes, making plans are good, setting ourselves up for good outcome is good, but there are things that happen that are out of our control. We have to be honest about that. The idea of control and God is a whole other sermon, but just believing in the concept of God, if you really think about it, blows up this whole idea of control in its ultimate sense. A lot of self-help culture doesn't set us up well for reality. This becomes really bad when self-help is mixed with the gospel. See, self-help preaching rarely accounts for the real world we actually inhabit, because there is reality that we have to deal with. The third quick lens I want to give you is this: often leaves God out of the picture. Self-help often leaves God out of the picture. So it focuses too much on self. It buys into the myth of control sometimes, and oftentimes it can leave God out of the picture. We can have willpower and we can be healthy with our own actions. We can make temporary changes. We can change habits and make healthy choices, but our souls, our hearts, they only truly, eternally, permanently change when we encounter God, when He does the changing in us. And so we know that we can fix things on the outside, but things on the inside is kind of what really matters. It's where things start. Matthew 15:17-20 says this: Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile a person, but eating with unwashed hands does not defile them. The inside, not the outside. Self-help can wrongly assume that we have the ability to change the inside, to change our hearts. The Christian theological concept for this is that we don't have the ability to redeem ourselves from sin. We can't do that. Self-help can sometimes replace prayer also, if we kind of look at this replacing God concept. So it can replace God and the whole idea of just redeeming ourselves, changing ourselves from within. It also can replace prayer with do-it-yourself mentality or spiritualized techniques to help ourselves. When really we just, as somebody who says we follow Jesus, we just need to be going to the feet of Jesus in prayer. So those are 3 quick lenses to kind of look at the whole self-help culture, self-help movement, and kind of see what's good, what's bad, what holds weight, what doesn't. So I want you to kind of remember those as we kind of journey through these kind of next 6 weeks. And as we look at this first one. So this first mantra that we're going to look at is this: live your truth. This idea can even manifest itself into sayings like, that's my truth, or be true to yourself, or even at times, you do you. Right? I'm sure you've heard that before. Maybe you've said that before. Well, what does this mean? Live your truth, or be true to yourself, or you do you. Live your truth is an idea that's becoming more and more popular. You can find it showing up in a lot of places. The big idea is that we should do what feels right to us. No one knows us like we do, and no one has the right to tell us what to do or what is true for our individual lives. It's a move away from the idea that truth is black and white and towards seeing truth kind of like in a million shades of gray. Now, the concept that each of us have the freedom to determine what is true and right might kind of sound all warm and fuzzy, and it can even sound somewhat liberating. But here's a spoiler alert, and we kind of alluded to this in the pre-service if you're watching. It's a lie. It's just not true. It's ultimately unable to give us the comfort and the liberty that we're so desperately craving. The comfort and the liberty that we're craving that even causes us to think of this concept of live your truth. When you throw it against the wall, it fails to give us that. See, I mean, just listen to these different statements about live your truth from the proponents of it and see if it passes the sniff test. Like, remember those 3 lenses? See if it kind of goes against those 3 lenses that we just talked about. Here's some quotes about live your truth. The purpose of life is to live your truth. So I believe that what our real life purpose is, that we're each here to fulfill, is to transcend the lies and rediscover or remember who we truly are, in infinite, fully aware being in physical form, connected to the oneness with the creative powers of the divine, and to realign with that truth. Another quote: if you do not decide and commit to living your truth, to living your life, and to being who you want to be, then you will just be another mediocre individual who is resigned to someone else's life. That's pretty stark. And then follow this one with me. This actually comes from a summary of a book called Live Your Truth. We don't stumble accidentally into an amazing life. It takes a conscious commitment to figuring out what we want to stand for. Now that kind of sounds pretty good, but then it quickly starts to kind of go off the rails. Finding our truth, it begins by looking inside ourselves, because when it rises from within, we have no choice but to express it, to live it. That is when magic happens: fulfillment, happiness, relationships, and success. It arises from within. That's when happiness happens, with relationships and success. I believe that we need to figure out who we are, and we definitely need to figure out what we stand for. But that should be decided with a foundation of actual truth, not on feelings or experiences. See, this is when the ideas we see these ideas start to come together and what people are actually trying to say. We're mixing this concept of truth with experiences and feelings. And here's a note for you. Feelings and experiences can be indicators for truth. They can be good indicators for truth, but they cannot replace truth as the foundation. See, when feelings and experiences become my foundation, things start to get a little shaky and rocky. And if we pull back the layers, this idea of live your truth is just kind of the combination of a bunch of old and tired and tried ideas. Live your truth, this combination of feelings and experiences, well, we can see that there's relativism kind of built into this concept. This idea that says that there's no absolute truth. We can also see that there's some existentialism built into it. This idea that you can't really know what is true unless you experience it. And then you can see that there's this popular, which is a popular worldview today, is of pluralism kind of built in, which says that all truth claims are equally valid. And of course, if you actually take a step back, you can see that this is kind of impossible. And I don't know about you, but that sounds exhausting. Trying to figure out a truth with all these different ideas and concepts running through it just sounds plain exhausting to me. This is why the values and belief systems, they cannot purely be based off of my feelings and experiences. What if you never find purpose from the inside? What if it constantly is changing? What if your truth is constantly changing? What happens when your truth lets you down or fails you? It can't be built off experiences or feelings. It just starts to get really shaky if you look at it. And here's a side note for you. Truth understood in the classical concept seems a bit more logical. And kind of truth in the classical concept is this. Truth is that which corresponds to reality. So truth corresponds to what we know to be real. Truth is that which matches its object. So truth can match objects in different things. Like, so if you're standing one direction, something is right to you, and if I'm standing the other direction, something is left to me. Truth is simply telling it like it is, and that's basically the simplest form of truth. Truth has to be real, and it has to be foundational. And this is why the Christian worldview of truth is so breathtakingly liberating. When we actually step into the idea of the Christian worldview, when we actually allow it to start to kind of consume our life and direct our path, it's pretty freeing. And I would argue that it gives you the liberating comfort that people are looking for when they say my truth or live your truth. So as we close, I want to give you 3 basic concepts that we find from the scriptures that talk about the Christian concept of truth. And the first one is this: truth is real and transcendent. We know from combing the scriptures that truth is very real and it's also transcendent. To be in touch with truth is to be in touch with reality. See, Charles Colson in his book, How Now Shall We Live, he says this: all citizens live better in a world that more closely conforms to reality, to the order God created. The world is built on truth and operates on truth. That is why scientists can depend on laws of nature. The laws of science do not belong to science. They belong to God. They're His truth. Science is only discovering the laws which God used to create the universe, that were already there, that already exist, that transcend you and I. Listen to Colossians 1:15 through 17. This is probably one of the great truths of our faith. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in Him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through Him and for Him. He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. See, things were created before you and I. Reality exists outside of you. Things are held together by someone that is greater than you or me. Truth is transcendent. Psalms 119, 160, and Isaiah 55, 8 through 9, they say this. I'll read them together. All your words are true. All your righteous laws are eternal. All your words are true. All your laws are eternal. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. We have to be honest and say that we think and do things that are against God's words. You see, there is no such thing as your truth and my truth. There is God's truth. There is the truth. There is an objective standard of truth outside of us that is above us. There is a moral order to the universe, just as there is a material and physical order. See, truth, it's so freeing to know that truth doesn't have to be built from something I conjure up based off of my feelings or experiences. It's something that's greater than myself. It's something that's bigger than me. It doesn't have to be about me. Billy Graham says this: truth is timeless. Truth does not change from one age to another, from one people to another, from one geographical location to another. Men's idea may differ, men's customs may change, men's moral codes may vary, but the great all-prevailing truth stands for time and eternity. The second basic truth in the Christian concept of truth is this: truth is a person. John 14:6 says this: Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you follow Jesus, you must believe that He is truth, that He is the true and faithful one. We should be consumed with Him and His truth. We shouldn't be consumed with our truth, but with His truth, because we're consumed with Him. The Christian faith is liberating because we don't have to build our lives on our truth. Can you start to see it? It's so freeing because we don't have to build our lives on our truth. Instead, we follow the one who called and proved Himself to be true. He called Himself and He proved Himself to be true. We're free from the pressures of constructing our own lives on fragility, our limited experiences, and our limited understanding. We aren't shackled to our imperfect self anymore. If truth is Jesus, then it carries with it the same characteristics of Jesus. And this is one of the coolest things. See, truth is real and it's transcendent, and truth is kind of it's catapulted. It's contained in this person called Jesus, and if that's true, then it carries the same characteristics of Jesus. See, Jesus is God, and so Jesus is unchanging. Jesus is steadfast. Jesus is constant. Truth is steadfast. Truth is constant, because truth is Jesus. And number three, the third kind of basic concept of truth is it can be known. So truth is real, it's transcendent. Truth is a person, and truth can be known. Look at John 8:31 through 32 with me. To the Jews who had believed Him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Because Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, we can know truth. We can know it. We can know truth because we can know Jesus. And the funny thing is this: we spend all this time and money and buying into principles and concepts and books and ways and life coaches to try to improve ourselves, to try to live out our truth. But the thing is, though, is that the radical transformation comes in the form of the free gift of God. We don't have to spend any money on it. We don't have to spend any time on these 5 principles. The radical transformation comes from a free gift given to us in the form of Jesus. 1 John 1:9 says this, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all. 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. You see, guys, we can create healthy habits, and we can make temporary change, and we can do good things, and it's not wrong to have self-improvement, but the only truly internal, permanent, eternal changing that happens comes from the free gift of God. It's not a mentality we buy into. It's not a book of 5 principles we buy. It's not listening to a life coach. It's following Jesus because he's truth. And because his truth is constant and true, it means that I don't have to live on the fragility of my truth that's ever changing and if we're honest, is imperfect and frail and sometimes downright bad. But I get to live on his truth, on who he is, and who he says I am. Because God's truth, Jesus' truth, is that he died for you, he loves you, and you get to be his child. That's what defines you. That's your ultimate truth. And I don't know anything more free or liberating than that. Thanks for being with us.